whole town called her unlucky. Mothers pulled children away. Men crossed the street. Nobody wanted her. Then, one farmer's son smiled and refused to leave.
Subscribe to Wild Sky Stories' new emotional tales every day.
The wagon rolled into Copper Springs on a Tuesday morning when the sun painted the desert mountains orange and gold. Evangeline Thornton kept her head down, her worn bonnet hiding her face from the curious stares that followed her every movement. She had arrived with nothing but a small trunk, $3 sewn into her petticoat, and a reputation that had traveled faster than any stagecoach. The townspeople whispered before her feet touched the dusty ground. They called her unlucky. They said she brought sorrow wherever she went. First her parents, taken by fever, then her brother, lost to a mining accident. Finally, her husband of only 6 months, thrown from his horse on their wedding journey west. 3 losses in 3 years. The people of her former town had made it clear she was no longer welcome among them. She found a room above the general store working for the elderly owner in exchange for shelter and meals. The townspeople avoided her whenever possible. Mothers pulled their children close when she passed. Young men crossed to the other side of the street. The preacher looked right through her as if she were made of glass. Evangeline understood. She had started to believe the whispers herself. Perhaps she truly was marked by misfortune. Perhaps she was meant to walk this earth alone, bringing sorrow to anyone foolish enough to care for her. 3 weeks into her lonely existence, she met Samuel McAllister for the first time. He came into the general store on a hot afternoon, dust coating his work clothes, his hat pushed back on his head. His hands were rough from labor, his face tanned from the sun, but his eyes held a gentleness that made Evangeline pause mid-sweep. He smiled at her. Nobody smiled at her anymore. She quickly looked away, her heart racing with something she could not name. Fear, perhaps, or the dangerous stirring of hope. Samuel approached the counter where Mr. Patterson, the store owner, was sorting mail. He ordered supplies for his father's farm, speaking in a voice that was quiet but warm. When he caught Evangeline watching him, he tipped his hat politely. She fled to the back room, clutching her broom like a shield. Mr. Patterson found her there moments later, his kind old face wrinkled with concern. He told her that Samuel was a good man, the only son of Thomas McAllister, who owned the largest wheat farm in the valley. The young man was 26, unmarried, and known throughout the county for his honest nature and hard work. Evangeline shook her head. She wanted nothing to do with good men. Good men deserved good women, not unfortunate widows with sorrow following at their heels. But Samuel kept coming back. Every week, sometimes twice, he would appear at the general store. He always needed something: nails, rope, flour, seeds. He always smiled at Evangeline. He always tried to speak with her. At first, she gave only short answers: yes, no, good day. She kept her eyes down and her hands busy. She built walls around her heart so high that even sunlight could not reach inside. Samuel did not seem to notice the walls, or perhaps he simply chose to climb them anyway. One afternoon he arrived during a thunderstorm, rain pouring from the sky in sheets of silver. The store was empty except for Evangeline, who was organizing shelves near the window. Lightning flashed, and she flinched. Memories of the night her husband was taken flooding her mind. The storm had been just like this one. The lightning had spooked the horse. She did not realize she was crying until Samuel appeared beside her with a handkerchief. He did not ask what was wrong. He did not demand an explanation. He simply stood there, offering comfort without words, waiting until her breathing steadied and her tears dried. When she finally looked up at him, he spoke gently. He told her that he had heard what people said about her. He told her that he did not believe a word of it. He told her that tragedy was not a mark of misfortune, but a burden. And burdens were meant to be shared. Evangeline wanted to run. She wanted to push him away before something terrible happened to him too. But her feet would not move, and her voice would not work, and something in his eyes made her feel safe for the first time in years. She whispered a thank you. It was barely audible above the rain. Samuel smiled and said it was a start. The weeks that followed changed everything. Samuel began finding excuses to visit more often. He brought small gifts from the farm, fresh eggs, a jar of honey, wildflowers picked from the meadow near his home. He never asked for anything in return. He never pressed her for conversation she was not ready to give. Slowly, cautiously, Evangeline began to open the door of her heart. She learned that Samuel had lost his mother when he was 12 years old. She learned that he understood grief in ways that others could not. She learned that his father had retreated into silence after his wife's passing, leaving a young boy to navigate sorrow alone. Samuel had emerged from that darkness with empathy carved into his soul. He did not see Evangeline as ill-fated. He saw her as someone who had survived unspeakable loss and was still standing. He admired her strength when she felt only weakness. The townspeople noticed the farmer's son spending time with the unfortunate widow. They warned him to stay away. They told him stories of loss and doom. They painted Evangeline as a woman to be feared. Samuel listened politely and then ignored every word. One evening, he invited Evangeline to visit the farm. His father wanted to meet her, he said. Thomas McAllister had heard about the woman who had captured his son's attention and was curious. Evangeline hesitated. Meeting Samuel's father felt like crossing a line she had sworn never to cross. It felt like admitting that she wanted something she could never have. It felt like hoping again. But Samuel looked at her with those gentle eyes, and she found herself saying yes. The McAllister farm was beautiful. Golden wheat stretched toward the horizon, swaying in the evening breeze like waves on a landlocked sea. The farmhouse was modest but well kept, with a porch that faced the sunset and rocking chairs that creaked with years of use. Thomas McAllister was a quiet man with silver hair and eyes that matched his son's. He welcomed Evangeline with a firm handshake and a nod of approval. Over dinner, he spoke little but watched carefully. He saw how Samuel looked at this woman. He saw how she tried to hide her own feelings behind lowered lashes and careful words. After the meal, Thomas pulled Evangeline aside. His voice was rough from years of prairie winds and unspoken emotions. He told her that his wife had been considered unlucky too. She came from a poor family with a history of illness. People warned him not to marry her. They said she would bring him nothing but hardship. He married her anyway, Thomas said. He would do it again every single day of his life. The 12 years they had together were worth more than a lifetime of playing it safe. Evangeline's eyes filled with tears. Thomas placed a weathered hand on her shoulder and told her that his son had his mother's heart. That heart did not give up on people. That heart saw beauty where others saw only shadows. She returned to town that night with something new blooming in her chest. It terrified her. It made her want to pack her trunk and disappear before she could bring harm to this family who had shown her only kindness. But she stayed. Summer turned to autumn, and the wheat fields turned gold before the harvest. Samuel visited every day now, sometimes working alongside his father, sometimes stealing hours to walk with Evangeline along the creek that ran behind the town. They talked about everything, dreams they had abandoned, fears they had never spoken aloud, the simple joys of watching clouds drift across endless blue skies. Evangeline told him about her parents, how they had filled their small home with laughter and music before the fever took them both. She told him about her brother who had dreamed of striking it rich in the silver mines and had promised to build her a house with a real glass window. She told him about her husband, a kind but restless man who had wanted to give her the world and instead had given her only grief. Samuel listened without judgment. He held her hand when words became too heavy. He made her laugh when memories threatened to pull her under. One afternoon, as they sat beneath an ancient oak tree, Samuel told her that he loved her. The words hung in the air between them, fragile and powerful. Evangeline felt her heart crack open, all the fear and doubt spilling out like water from a broken dam. She told him he should not love her. She told him she was dangerous. She told him that everyone who loved her ended up leaving her behind. Samuel did not argue. He simply took her hands in his and asked a question that silenced every protest in her mind. He asked her if she loved him too. Evangeline looked into his eyes, those patient, gentle eyes that had seen past her walls from the very beginning. She thought about the months they had spent together. She thought about how he made her feel like more than a tragedy. She thought about waking up each day, with the purpose again, with hope, with the belief that maybe the future held something other than sorrow. She said yes. She loved him. She was terrified, but she loved him. Samuel smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through storm clouds. He told her that fear was not a reason to run from happiness. He told her that he would rather have one day with her than 100 years without. He told her that whatever came, they would face it together. The town talked, as towns always do. They predicted disaster. They whispered that the farmer's son was making the biggest mistake of his life. They watched and waited for tragedy to strike. Months passed, and nothing happened. Samuel did not fall ill. He was not thrown from a horse. No lightning struck him down. The crops came in strong, the farm prospered, and the unfortunate widow continued to smile more with each passing day. Slowly, the whispers faded. People began to see what Samuel had seen all along. They saw a woman who was not unlucky but simply had faced hard times. Simply human. Simply someone who had known too much loss too young. They saw the way she cared for old Mr. Patterson at the general store. They saw how she helped at the church when they finally allowed her through the doors. They saw kindness and strength where they had once imagined only darkness. On the first day of spring, Samuel asked Evangeline to marry him. He did not have a ring. He had something better. He had a promise written in his own hand, a vow that he would love her through sunshine and storm, through harvest and hardship, through every tomorrow that God granted them. He read it aloud beneath the same oak tree where he had first spoken his love. Evangeline listened with tears streaming down her face. When he finished, she threw her arms around him and said yes, before he could even ask the question properly. The wedding was held in his little church at the edge of town. The same preacher who had once looked through Evangeline like glass now smiled as he joined her hand with Samuel's. Thomas McAllister sat in the front pew, his weathered face soft with joy. Mr. Patterson dabbed his eyes with the same handkerchief Evangeline had once borrowed during a thunderstorm. Even some of the townspeople who had whispered and warned came to witness the ceremony. They saw the way the bride and groom looked at each other, and they understood that love was stronger than superstition, stronger than any misfortune real or imagined. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel kissed Evangeline gently, reverently, as if she were the most precious thing he had ever held. She kissed him back and felt the last of her walls crumble to dust. The years that followed were not without hardship. Drought came one summer and nearly took the wheat. A harsh winter claimed 3 calves and left the family huddled around the fireplace for warmth. Thomas McAllister passed peacefully in his sleep when Samuel was 34, leaving the farm entirely in his son's capable hands. But through every trial, Samuel and Evangeline faced the world together. They'd built a life on that golden prairie, expanding the farmhouse to include a nursery that would eventually hold 3 children. 2 boys with their father's patient eyes. 1 girl with her mother's quiet strength. Evangeline taught her children that loss was part of life, but so was love. She taught them that the heart could break and heal, and break again, each time growing larger with each scar. She taught them never to let fear steal their happiness. Samuel taught them to work the land with respect. He taught them to see beauty in simple things. He taught them that a person's worth was not determined by what others said, but by how they treated the people around them. Together, they created a home where laughter echoed across the wheat fields, and grief was never faced alone. 20 years after their wedding, Evangeline stood on the farmhouse porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Samuel came to stand beside her, his hair now touched with silver, his hands still rough from honest work. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders and asked what she was thinking. She told him she was thinking about that first day in the general store. She was thinking about how she had tried to run from him. She was thinking about how grateful she was that he had refused to let her hide. Samuel smiled, the same gentle smile that had broken through her walls all those years ago. He told her that some things were worth chasing, some people were worth waiting for. She had been worth everything, Evangeline leaned into his embrace and watched the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. She was no longer the unfortunate widow that no one wanted. She was loved. She was home. And she understood finally that misfortune was only a story people told when they did not believe in miracles. She had her miracle standing right beside her. The prairie wind whispered through the wheat, carrying away the last echoes of old sorrows, leaving only the quiet joy of two hearts that had found each other against all odds. In Copper Springs, they still told stories about the farmer's son and the woman everyone feared. But now, the stories had happy endings. Now the stories were about love winning. Now the stories gave hope to anyone who had ever felt unwanted, unloved, forgotten. Because if Evangeline Thornton could find happiness, perhaps anyone could. Perhaps love was always waiting, patient and gentle, ready to change everything for those brave enough to let it in.